Hello, I'm Jonathan,
I'm Kendra.
and we're going to be talking to you about the ancient Roman numbering system, otherwise known as Roman numerals. So let's start with a little bit of history regarding the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, or what we traditionally consider to be the Roman Empire, began with the coronation of Augustus Caesar as the first citizen of Rome in 27 BC, effectively making him the first emperor of Rome. The Western Empire, the area of the empire that had Rome as their capital, lasted over 500 years from 27 BC until 476 AD, after Rome became overrun with barbarians. However, before the fall of the Western Empire, the Roman Empire had split in the 300s AD. So there was a Western Roman Empire and an Eastern Roman Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire is commonly referred to as the Byzantine Empire, and that empire lasted almost 1,000 more years until the fall of Constantinople in 1453. Now, the Roman Empire lasted long mostly because of two reasons, and these two reasons are because of their strong military tactics and because of Roman ingenuity. Strong military tactics allowed for vast expansion of the empire, dominating over the entire Mediterranean area in its peak in 117 AD under the Roman Emperor Trajan during the Pax Romana, or the Roman peace. And while there was definitely strong military, there was also great technological innovation in Rome as well, with inventions and architecture. And these developments created aqueducts, arch bridges, plumbing, and road building. The saying, all roads lead to Rome, is a testament to how Romans built their roads.
So moving into the topic of our research, what are Roman numerals? They are the symbols that were used within the ancient Roman numbering system. And these numerals are very different from what we would consider what we know as numerals today. We use what we know as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and we have a symbol that pops into our head when we think of those numbers. Roman numerals were based upon lettering, which we'll go into in a little bit, whereas our current numbering system is the Hindu-Arabic numeral system. So Roman numerals were base 10, kind of. They were based upon multiples of 1s and 5s. However, they did not have place values as we have in the Hindu-Arabic numeral system. So they don't have a 1s place and a 10s place and a 100s place as we do, which means that it's not truly a base 10. And then this leads into the reason why there's no 0 within Roman numerals. And this is because there's no need to express the absence of a value for a certain value place.
So the two cultures that had the greatest influence on the Roman numeral system were the Greeks and the Etruscans. The Etruscans were a civilization that predated Rome, but also lived in the Italian region. So their influence obviously had a lot of impact on the development of Rome, and they had a slightly different alphabet, and so different numerals and symbols were used to notate the values. The 1, 5, and 10 symbols were pretty consistent, but as we move into bigger numbers, we see larger distinctions, such as with L, C, and M. Another culture that had a great influence were the Greeks. Now, as Rome was rising, the greatest influence in the Mediterranean area was the Greeks before the Romans. So in order to do trade, Romans probably would have had to have been able to use Greek numerals to notate specific values. And these values were notated, as you see here, with the psi, phi, and theta symbols. And these Greek and Etruscan numerals look slightly similar, particularly with their L values. And that's probably by design so that trading within Italy was easy because they would have recognized Etruscan symbols, and then trading with cultures that knew Greek would also be easy because they had a Greek numeral system. Now, these numeral systems faded and led to the rise of Roman numerals as the Roman Empire grew, because as the Roman Empire grew, the influence of the Roman language grew as well, and that would be the influence of Latin. And so numbers changed from Greek and Etruscan values into Latin letters that notated specific values.
So it's very clear that Etruscan and Greek civilizations had a great impact on Roman numeral system. However, nobody knows the true origin of how these different symbols eventually ended up as the symbols that we know today as Roman numerals. So there are three theories of the origin. The first of which is finger counting. So that would be the idea that if you were to hold your hand out in front of you and you stick just your index finger up, it looks like one dash or an eye. Two side by side looks like two dashes or two eyes, and this would represent two. And then so on and so forth until you get to 5, where your 4 fingers stick together and your thumb sticks out on the side, and then it results in a V. And this is why, this is the idea behind this, is that now V is going to represent 5 because all 5 fingers are up. However, this theory did not account for the origin of L, C, D, or M, but the thought behind that would be that the Latin word centum would represent the C, and centum means 100 in Latin, and then milli means 1000 in Latin, and that's where the M would come from. The second potential origin would be from tally notching. So this would come from Etruscan shepherds who would be out in the fields counting their sheep, and they would be marking it on a stick. So they would put little notches into the stick, which would look like eyes. And then they would have certain symbols that would represent that they made it to a milestone. So for 5, they would create a V symbol. And this would show, as they're looking at their tallies, it would show, oh, so everything before this leads up to a 5. And so then they had these different symbols that they would mark on their sticks to mark that they've made it to a certain number. And those are shown on the screen here. And then the third and final theory of origin is that the symbols X, C, and phi started out as the symbols for 10, 100, and 1000. And then if you were to take each of these symbols and cut them in half, so for X and C, if you cut them in half with a horizontal line, it results in a V or an L, whereas with a phi, if you were to cut it in half vertically, it results in a D.
So what Roman numerals look like? We have the I, the V, the X, the L, the C, the D, and the M. And each of these values has a Hindu-Arabic equivalency. I corresponds with 1, V with 5, X with 10, L with 50, C with 100, D with 500, and M with 1000.
So now that we know the basic numerals that make up the various numbers, how can we identify a number that is between 1 and 5 or between 5 and 10 and so on and so forth? So we would start, the Roman numbering system is based majority upon addition and subtraction. So we would start with our largest numeral. So in the case of 3, we're going to start with 3 i's side by side because I is the largest value we can get to before getting to 5. So 3 i's side by side, you would add them together because 1 and 1 and 1 is 3. So this represents 3. Now for 7, you would read 7 as 5 plus 1 gives you 5 plus 1 is 6 plus 1 is 7. Now, a little bit later in ancient Roman history, they came up with the use of subtraction in order to represent a number. So this would be by placing a smaller numeral to the left of a larger numeral, and this would be subtracting from that value. So in the case of 4, you would have IV, I is 1, V is 5, 1 less than 5 is 4. In the case of 90, you would have X is 10, C is 100, 10 less than 100 is 90. And so these are the two basic ways that you would perform or come up with larger numbers that are not just the basic numerals. So then after that, the ancient Romans did not do very much multiplication. However, they did have ways to multiply to make very large numbers. So in order to make a number of 5,000, they would take the numeral 5 and then place a bar above it. And this would represent 5 times 1,000 would give you 5,000. Or in the case of a V with a bar on top of it, you have 5,000 plus an X, which is 10, plus 2 I's, which is 2, you would get 5,012. And that's how you would formulate a larger number. And then for very large numbers, say multiplying by 100,000, then you would have vertical bars on either side of your numeral and a horizontal on top. And this would represent that numeral times 100,000. So in the case of a V, V is 5. 5 times 100,000 is 500,000. And then there's a few more examples there on the screen. But for more complex calculations, the Romans would use something called an abacus.
So when performing calculations, the most common method at the time was probably using an abacus. And because the abacus allowed for a large system of tally that revolved around addition and subtraction. The word abacus itself is a Latin word, which comes from a Greek word, which means counting table. And these calculations would take place in chunks, and only the final value would be recorded with Roman numerals. So it's like, well, we got 3 coins from this guy, 7 coins from this guy, 10 coins from another guy, but we had to pay a certain fee, so we lost 2 coins, etc., etc. There would be a scribe of some sort who would be doing his tallying on his abacus, and a skilled person with an abacus can do these calculations very, very fast. And with all the addition and subtraction, and once the final total came up, he would record that final tally using Roman numerals. As you can see on the abacus, there are values for the I, the X, the C, and the 1,000 place, all the way up to what looks to be 1,000,000. And the bottom stones represent a ones place, and the top stone represents 5. So if 2 of those pebbles in the 1 place were moved up, that represent 2. If that top stone in the ones place would slide down, that represents 5. So it allows for 1, 2, 3, and 4 to be represented in 1. When the 5 is slid down, it allows for numbers 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then there is a shift by a power of 10 for each bar to the left. So, or to the right, sorry. So there is a nuance to being able to calculate with an abacus, but a skilled mathematician could be able to perform these calculations, and it is a useful tool when dealing with addition and subtraction, and it allows for good tally, which could then be easily translated into Roman numerals.
So as I mentioned before, the ancient Romans did not have a great system for multiplication. They would add a bar to multiply by 1,000. They would add 2 bars on the side and a bar on top to multiply by 100,000. However, they did use fractions occasionally throughout their culture. So the 2 places that this is most prevalent is within their money and their land. So both of these were based off of duodecimal systems. So this means that their fractions were based on 12 rather than 10. So in the context of money, they would have 1 unit of money would be called an as, which represented by AS, and then 12 uncia make up 1 as. So, which also the word uncia eventually really influenced the word inch in English. And as we know, an inch is 1/12 of a foot. So also within the context of money, they would have an S to represent half of a value. So this likely comes from the word semis, which means half. So this coin on the right-hand side, if you were to turn your figure, the coin 90 degrees, it looks like a little S. So that would be worth 6, and then the 4 dots are worth 1 each, so that would be worth 10. So this coin is worth 10. And then in the context of land, one unit of land is called a scripulum, and this is a 10 by 10 foot area. And then an aguarum is 228 times the size of a scripulum, or you could say a scripulum is 1/228 the size of an aguarum. And in case it's not very obvious to you, 228 is 12 times 19, which is part of the duodecimal system. So while these fractions were not used very often outside of this context, Romans did use fractions to approximate numbers and whatnot, but they would only use fractions that could be made with the base 12. So in that case, it would be 1/12, or 2/12 is 1/6, or 3/12 is 1/4, and like this. So they did not have a 1/7, 1/9, or 1/11, because this was not, you couldn't come up with this value within the duodecimal system. So today, many of us have seen Roman numerals used in one way or another. One very popular way that it's used is in the numbering system for the Super Bowl. So the photo here is a photo of the logo for Super Bowl 47. And as you can see, the X is before the L, so L is 50, minus 10 is 40, plus 5 plus 2 is 47. Some other places that we would see the use of Roman numerals today would be in the naming of the Pope, or in monarch names. So if we think about like King Henry IX, it would be King Henry and then 9 represented by Roman numerals. This is also seen within generational suffixes. So if someone were to name their child the same name as them, so let's say John, John Jr., and then their child would be John III, which would be represented by 3 I's, which are Roman numeral for 3. Another place that we see it very often is within page numbering, namely within prefaces. And one thing to note there is that generally in page numbering, we would use the lowercase of the Roman numeral, and this is more of a stylistic thing. But some other places we would see it would be in sequels to movies and video games. Within the context of astronomy, it would be satellites and moon names are typically named using Roman numerals. Within chemistry, the groups of the periodic table are represented by Roman numerals. In the medical context, pharmaceuticals, prescriptions may be identified by Roman numerals. And one thing I found kind of interesting was that if the final letter or the final numeral is an I, they would change it to a J to avoid tampering with the prescription. A few other places would be in recording dates or stating centuries. Parts of Europe actually use Roman numerals to represent the day of the week. And then, as I mentioned before, Super Bowl and other large gaming events, such as the Olympic Games, use Roman numerals to identify what number it is in a sequence.
So we've talked about Roman numerals, but what's the connection to Roman numerals? Well, up until the Middle Ages, many Western civilizations used Roman numerals as their primary number system. And these civilizations were the civilizations most greatly impacted by the Western Roman Empire. And those civilizations developed into countries like Switzerland and France and Spain and Portugal and England. So all of these major European countries had Roman numerals as their primary number system up until the Middle Ages. And with the development of trade, there eventually came a time where Europeans became aware of Hindu-Arabic numerals. And this development probably surprised a lot of Europeans that there is a different number system that might be more efficient than Roman numerals. And that change probably caused a lot of controversy among the European scholars of the time. As we've seen in this class, there has been a constant battle between traditional mathematics and reform mathematics. In this case, traditional mathematics is represented by Roman numerals, and reform mathematics is represented by Hindu-Arabic numerals. And when these went head to head, it was time to see which numbering system was more efficient. Now, there were probably many critics of the transition in the beginning, But because we have transitioned to Hindu-Arabic numerals, there have been many benefits to come from this. Because of its spread from the Hindu-Arabic area into Europe, now every country from Europe to India can use the same number system. So it simplifies the use of numbers throughout the world. So it creates a simplified and universal number system. It also simplifies the process of multiplication. Since Roman system is based on adding, there was not really a ton of room for being able to multiply. So it really was one of the major challenges with Roman numeral systems. But with Hindu-Arabic numerals, every number is notated by a specific digit. And these digits can be represented in a true base 10 fashion. And because of these developments and simplicity of multiplication, it allowed for new mathematics to be discovered, such as calculus and differential equations. Similar to the study of Latin, the study of Roman numerals faded because of increasing lack of necessity for knowledge in that subject. When universities were developed initially, they were taught completely in Latin, and students who went to universities needed to know Latin in order to get higher education. But with the development of the printing press and other technologies that allowed for the common person to become somewhat educated, more and more commoners were receiving access to higher education. And with this access to higher education, more professors and instructors started teaching in their native languages instead of teaching in Latin. So there became a lesser influence of Latin in higher education. And this is very similar to what happened with Roman numerals. With the introduction of Hindu-Arabic numerals, lots of mathematical processes become easier to do. And so knowledge of how to do calculation with Roman numerals becomes less and less important. And while we still see Roman numerals in everyday lives, it's not that important that we know how to calculate with them. We just need to know what values they represent. And this relates to a continued notion in this class, is that priorities of the world continue to shift, and we cannot always hold to tradition, and we must keep moving forward. And that is true of all developments over time. Thank you for paying attention to our presentation. I hope you learned something. Have a great day.